Okay, so that's the only way to learn coding as an absolute beginner. And this is the conclusion of me learning, working, and teaching a lot of stuff in software engineering, like mobile apps development, backend, front end, AI engineering, and a bunch of other stuff. This video is going to save you a lot of time that you just can't imagine. Okay, first of all, if you want to learn coding, then you want to be a computer programmer. And if you want to be a computer programmer, you must know what a computer programmer does. Okay, and primarily, a computer programmer does two things. First, he solves problems. Okay, and second, he manages complexity while solving those problems. Okay, so a computer programmer does two things. Primarily, he solves problems and he manages complexity while solving those problems. And so, if you want to be a computer programmer and if you want to learn coding, then you need to be able to solve problems and you need to be able to manage complexity while solving those problems. How can you solve problems? By practicing solving problems. And let me elaborate more and tell you exactly how to do that. First of all, I want to talk about what I call the knowledge gap. Okay, so um, I see the knowledge as a big gap represented in this big white circle. Okay, so this big white circle is the knowledge gap. Okay, so knowledge is just a big white gap like this. Okay, and so whenever you learn something new, you fill in a gap in this circle. Okay, and so you learn something new, you fill in a gap, you learn something new, you fill in a gap, and then you learn something else, you fill in a gap, and so on. And until you die, you will keep filling in dots and gaps in this circle, and most probably you wouldn't be able to make it fully black because each science has like a lot of stuff that you can't just keep up with in a lifetime. Okay, so this is the knowledge gap. Whenever you learn something new, you fill in a gap in this knowledge. And so all of these dots right here, okay, is considered experience. Okay, and so the more dots you have in your knowledge gap, the more experienced you are. Okay, and so now the question is, and the thing that should matter most to us is how can we fill in the gaps in here, okay, so that we can gain experience. Okay, so that we can gain experience. Uh, where's the word experience? I don't know what happened. Anyways, this is experience. Okay, how can we get experience? How can we fill in the gaps inside our knowledge gap? That's what I'm gonna tell you right now. These gaps, okay, are just gaps in your knowledge gap. And the way to fill in those gaps is by solving problems, okay? There's no something magical could happen here. There's no shortcut, okay? If you want to be knowledgeable and if you want to gain experience, you should fill in the gaps in your knowledge gap. How? By solving problems over and over and over again. Okay, if you run away from problems, you will never learn anything. And I know that because when I first started, like I used to run away from problems, because it's frustrating. But at some point, I learned that problems is the thing that teaches me. Without them, I wouldn't learn anything. And so I stopped being resentful when I face problems and I started being grateful because I really knew that problems is the thing that I can utilize to be better. Okay, and so you should see problems as a positive thing, not a negative thing. You should be grateful when you face a new problem because it means that you're gonna learn something new. And now the question is, how can we fill in the gaps in our knowledge gap and how can we gain experience? I said that this is by solving problems, but how? We just can't solve problems randomly because maybe this is going to be a waste of time. Okay, and so I'll tell you exactly the framework that you can use to gain experience and solve problems and learn, and so you can fill in the gaps in your knowledge gap. Okay, you can do that. You can fill in the gaps in your knowledge gap. You can learn, you can practice, you can solve problems using the framework that I call the GP framework. Okay, the GP framework works as follows. First of all, you get, okay, you get what? You get knowledge. Okay, the first thing you need to do in the GP framework in order to learn coding and learn anything else in life is you first do the G, okay, which is not gangsta, it's get knowledge. Okay, then you do something which is practice. Okay, so first you get knowledge, then you practice. Then you do what? You get knowledge again. Okay, and then you practice, and then you get knowledge, then you practice, and so on. And you keep repeating this until you get to the level that you want. Okay, and so practice here, okay, equals to solving problems, right? When you are practicing something, you're basically solving problems. Okay, now the question is, how can you do these two things? How can you get knowledge? How can you practice? How can you solve problems? Okay, the framework just doesn't stop here. I'll tell you how to do exactly that. Okay, first of all, let's talk about getting knowledge. Okay, if you want to get knowledge, all you need to do is just ask questions. Okay, that's the only way to get knowledge. You need to ask questions and ask as many of them as you can. Okay, that's the only way to get knowledge. You need to ask questions and ask as many of them as you can. Okay, and so if I'm learning like how to drive a car, I need to ask a question. The first question might be, what is a car? Okay, and so I go online and I search about what is a car, and then like how does the car walk, and then how can I drive the car? Like when you learn how to drive a car, there are a lot of questions that you need to know. You get inside a car and you need to know what is this, what is that, and so you ask questions, you search about them, and that's how you get knowledge. Okay, but if you only do that, if you know what is a car and what are the components that exist inside a car, you wouldn't be able to drive a car because you need to do this the next step, which is the practice. Okay, but now let's just focus on getting knowledge. So in order to get knowledge, you need to ask questions. Okay, but if you new to a field, if you're new to programming, if you're new to coding, most probably you wouldn't know what are the right questions to ask. And so here comes the thing that's so important in getting knowledge, which is the knowledge source. Okay, we want to get knowledge, and so we will ask questions, but we need something that we can just go over, okay, so that we can ask questions better. And this thing is the knowledge source. Okay, as a beginner, you have multiple knowledge sources. The first is courses. Okay, because courses, I guess, is the most beginner friendly thing that, or the most beginner friendly knowledge source that you can start with. Second thing, you have blogs. Okay, third, you have AI. Okay, there are two knowledge sources that you can utilize, which are books and docs, but these are kind of too advanced for beginners. And so what you need to do is that you need to have a knowledge source that will help you ask better questions. And so, first of all, you might find the course, okay, that talks about the thing that you want to learn, whether it's front end, back end, AI engineering, mobile apps development, DevOps, whatever. You're gonna find the course, and we don't want you to just overthink this and like look for the best course ever in 3 months. You don't do that. You just pick a course randomly. I always say that spending 6 months in a bad course is gonna be way better than spending 6 months doing nothing, because beginners always fall into this trap of finding the perfect niche, finding the perfect course. You shouldn't do that. You just should pick something randomly, and it's gonna teach you a lot than do nothing. Okay, so the first thing, you can find a course. Okay, and while you're going through this course, you're gonna start asking questions in order to get knowledge, which is the first step of the GP framework. Get knowledge, practice, repeat. And so the first thing you need to do is to get knowledge. The way to get knowledge is by asking questions. And in order to ask questions easier and better, you should find a knowledge source. Okay, this knowledge source could be a course. And so now let's say that you have a question in mind. You're learning about for loop, for instance, and a question came to your mind, which is, what is the purpose of for loop? What is how to get the best performance using for loops? You can here utilize the second source, which is blogs. Okay, and so you can go to Google and search for the question that came to your mind, and you can use a blog to answer this question for you. The third knowledge source is AI, and I always advise against using AI as a beginner. Okay, but if you're gonna use AI, you can do the so-called, or not the so-called, you can do what I call the 15 minutes rule. Okay, and it works as follows. When you face any new problem, what you do is that you don't just go straight to AI and ask it for help. You struggle and try to solve it on your own for at least 15 minutes, could be 30 minutes, could be 45 minutes, depending on how much you can do. And so you just don't go straight to AI. You try to think about the problem, you try to solve it yourself on your own, and then you can get back to AI to back you up. Okay, so now we talked about the first G in, or the G in the GP framework. First is get knowledge. Okay, now we're gonna talk about practice. Let's just recap getting knowledge real quick. So you need to get knowledge in order to start learning, and the way you get knowledge is by asking questions. And um, you can use a knowledge source to ask questions easier as a beginner. This knowledge source could be courses, could be blogs, could be AI. Okay, and so you're gonna go over a course, then you're gonna start asking questions. And when you ask those questions, you're gonna go to blogs to answer those questions for you. And you can use AI if you want. But if you're going to use AI, you need to apply the 15 minutes rule. And it means that you're going to try to solve any problem on your own. And when you give up after 15 minutes or 30 minutes or 45 minutes, you can go to AI and ask it for help. Now, let's go to the P in the GP framework, which is practice. How can you practice? Okay, so you will find a tutorial. Okay, I always see people advising against using tutorial to learn coding or to learn anything, and their justification is that you might fall into the tutorial hell trap if you do so. But I totally disagree. Tutorials are awesome. Like, you get tens of years of experience in just like an hour or two or five or whatever, depending on the courses or the tutorials duration. But there's no other thing that's going to give you the same experience that you get from a tutorial. Okay, and so tutorials are amazing. The thing is that, how can you use tutorials to get the best out of them without falling into the tutorial hell trap? And that's what I'm exactly going to tell you now. Okay, so first you will find a tutorial. Okay, and this tutorial is just an application, okay, in the field that you're learning, whether it's front end, back end, or anything else. But what you do is that you will practice while you're watching the tutorial. And so the instructor is going to say, okay, let's do this, and we're going to do it that way. And you just do exactly like he does. Okay, but you don't stop here. If you stop here, if you watch the tutorial and practice while the instructor is going over the tutorial, that's going to be a problem, and you're going to fall into tutorial hell, and you're going to see tutorials as a bad thing. But you don't stop here. After you finish the tutorial, okay, and after you've practiced with the instructor, what you're gonna do is you're gonna build the project again from scratch on your own. you need to do that. Okay, you always need to drive the car yourself in order to learn how to drive a car. If you watch someone driving a car, you wouldn't learn if you sat there for years. Okay, and so what you need to do is you need to start doing the project again on your own. Okay, and since you aren't that experienced yet, you might get stuck, and so you're gonna get stuck again even though you just watched the tutorial, but you're gonna get stuck if you are a beginner. And so what you do is that you go to the tutorial again and see how the instructor solved the problem, get back to your project and solve it on your own, and so on. And so tutorials give you the conclusion of years of experience in just in some hours. Nothing else is going to give you this kind of experience, but um, the way you use tutorials matter. Okay, so the way is just the way that I told you now, is that you go over a tutorial and you practice with the instructor, and then you practice on your own without someone's help. Okay, and of course if you get stuck, you get back to the tutorial and see how the person solved it, and then you get back to your project and do it again, and so on. And so that's how you learn. Okay, people always think that there's a shortcut to learning, but there isn't any shortcut for learning but suffering. You need to suffer in order to learn. That's the only way to learn. Okay, so the GP framework is awesome. This is all of this is what I concluded after years working and teaching and learning in software engineering, a lot of stuff. Okay, so the GP framework is awesome. You can take a screenshot, okay, to this framework, GP framework. Just put it on your phone. Always get back to it. Whenever you need to learn something new, you need to get knowledge, and then you need to practice, and then you need to repeat, and so on. That's how you learn anything, whether it's coding or learning how to drive a car or getting a PhD or passing an exam or whatever. Okay, so I think that's everything I had for today. Okay, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and always remember, Omar's all he needs. Goodbye.